itadinfifteen. I'm going to make some apologies first. We've had one of our panelists have some technology issues, so Amanda's not going to be able to join us, although she might do as we go through. So we're going to cover it off. I'm going to take part as Amanda for this afternoon. And we're going to be joined today by Oliver Mason from CoCycle and Ken Parker from ICT Reverse. So good afternoon, gentlemen.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone.
We are going to be talking today about it's not easy being green, as we see an awful lot of sustainability, circularity, and general green credentials being talked about, particularly in the channel. So for an ITAD, Ollie, it's dead easy being green. It's just about product reuse, isn't it?
If only it was that case. Thanks, Steve. I think when we look at the OEM piece, in line with the bullet points related to this session, there's so many examples whereby they could be doing more, and not just they could be doing more, they're actively building a business model based on the opposite. So in the case of mobile devices, so we think around our phones and our tablets, iCloud being a key mechanism whereby essentially linked to user profiles, the device can be locked to the user rather than the business. We can spend huge amounts of time working with our clients to sit there and try and unenroll devices. But ultimately, this takes both time on our side, but time on the client side as well when they want a seamless process. Time and time again, we speak with our clients and they find it so frustrating that equipment is rendered obsolete through what should be ultimately a procedural point. It should be a point of these devices are locked down to iCloud, Mr. Customer. What is the proof of purchase? How do we prove to Apple that these can be unenrolled from iCloud? It just simply doesn't exist at the moment. And I think that it serves Apple well for those devices to be recycled and broken down as opposed to being reused. Similarly, on the networking equipment side, we spent some time talking about this in the past, Steve, and we think around the two leaders in that market, switches, routers, firewalls, APs, building a business model which is defined by support subscriptions, software subscriptions, again, means you have this massive surplus equipment at the end of the life cycle that ultimately can't be reused because the cost of reuse in terms of that being unassigned from a dashboard, new client wants it, but has to then purchase the software subscription or the support subscription, means that ultimately it's more cost effective just to purchase a whole new network. Now, that's not where we need to be, and that's not where the networking providers need to be. But again, it serves them well to have that restriction in their model. I think finally as well, in our previous call, we talked about this, storage and server arrays. And this is a real worry for me when we talk around data and the data on those devices, the data within the arrays. There are multiple vendors that offer promotions based upon you return this, we'll give you a few extra points of discount on your deal reg. They won't actually look at how it's being returned, who's processing it, the chain of custody. It's here's a box, Mr. Customer, please put this in the post. To the point whereby quite often there isn't even any reference to data erasure or data destruction. So what we're doing from a vendor standpoint, right, and you're one of those vendors that are offering promotions, you're obliging the client to start learning about ITAD and trying to do this in-house themselves when they're not a specialist, or alternatively, you're saying put terabytes and terabytes of data that maybe sat on an all-flash array, a SAN, a NAS device into the post, and then we'll sort it out when it gets to the other side. Now, that flies in the face of what ITAD is all about. And I think time and time again, from an OEM standpoint, the focus is always on the next deal, discount structures, deal registration structures, rather than actually tackling the problem. My final point is, so many VARs and MSPs that we work with will continually complain to us and say to us, we're doing all the way of collection. They've had their additional deal registration points, but our cupboards now, our store cupboards, our cages are full of equipment that they're not willing to actually take back. There is no want to reuse. There is no want to process that effectively. CoCycle, can you go and process this effectively? Well, of course we can. But the vendors, through our vendor accreditations, have obliged us never to reuse those products. Okay. So on the idea of the OEM restrictions, I think that the business models are quite often created to incentivize new purchases rather than addressing the problem.
Agreed. Let's pick up on the pairing question. So Ken, for those who may be uninitiated, because you guys see this en masse, what's the restrictions from reusing any device? Give a scenario of how a device may not be able to be reused for something which is outside of your control.
So nice to get on from what Ollie said there. Again, we could do with manufacturers and vendors assisting. to the level where it would assist with current legislation that's coming out. So for probably the last 15 years, the EA have said to us, what you're handling is e-waste. And whether people within our industry did or didn't, it was down to interpretation of the definition of waste. But I would say quite a large percentage decided we would do that, and we would get exemptions and waste permits and use the correct waste transfer notes and hazardous waste consignment notes. And we've happily done that because the vendors had an obligation to take a certain amount of e-waste off the market. So we would do that, and we would, for want of a better phrase, sell evidence notes back to a producer compliance scheme, a PCS, and the vendors would hit their obligations for recycling targets by buying it off a PCS, who would come to someone like us, who's a saying authorized treatment facility, and buy the evidence note off you. Everyone's happy. We're making money off something that we were doing anyway. The EA have started to hit their recycling targets because they are getting the evidence issued through the resettlement centre. The vendors are getting their evidence to meet their obligations. Everyone's happy in that scenario, and we did it because we were told to. We were really happy just getting kit, data erasing it and selling it, no problem. What's then happened recently is the POPs guidance that's coming out. So this is persistent organic pollutants, and this is really putting a sort of a spanner in the works. They're redressing the definition of waste and the person's intention. And the main issue there on the reuse is they're saying you can reuse it in the UK if it's made after 2009, because we know that these persistent organic pollutants, essentially things we used to put into plastics to stop them setting on fire, we know that they're very limited after 2009, so we're happy for you to reuse them. But what they're saying is after 2009, whether it's fit for reuse or not, you cannot export them because they're into the waste chain now. Why have they done this? Well, the main thing is they want to do the right thing, and we don't want these persistent organic pollutants getting out there into landfill. Great. Again, everyone's really happy with that. The bad side of that things is that it's kind of pushing things down the sort of waste hierarchy. We want, prevention. Don't get rid of it if it's perfectly working, but reuse. And that's what the vast majority of people do here. Within this, who are viewing this. The problem there is they're saying it has to be incinerated or destroyed when it's got these POPs, and you can't do that. So we're going to create this surplus in the UK of these kind of devices, and the market price will change. And it just seems madness that people are going to destroy things that are perfectly working. Also, we're now having to move them on hazardous waste consignment notes. So kindly, where you have to pay £10 for every return, they're also generating some money off doing that as well. That's cynical, me saying that, but it's really going to be a troublesome period whilst this guidance comes through. Ultimately, we all want to do the right thing. Doing the green thing is usually commercially the best thing to do. But at the moment, this piece of legislation is kind of putting some challenges in place. And the only way I can see getting around at the moment with where it's at is that people will stop moving it as waste and just go back to how we did 15 years ago and just deal with it as secondhand goods. And in which case, no one wins. We don't get to sell the evidence. They don't get to meet their recycling targets. And the stuff that they're trying to stop getting exported gets exported anyway because it's not entered the waste chain. The danger, as we've always discussed, is limited because whilst the elements are still within those products, they're not really out into the chain. So that's a real issue that we've got coming up in terms of legislation. How the manufacturers could help is if you can prove there's no POPs after 2009, you can reuse it. So if they issued like a material safety data sheet and said, this does have POPs or doesn't have POPs, we would know, right, I can destroy this one or I can reuse this one.
The problem with that is the OEMs don't really know themselves though, do they?
That's exactly the issue. And it would cost them some money. And what is their incentive to do so? Because ultimately they'd like to sell us a new one.
Let's try and loop this round a little bit into discussion. So we've heard challenges of the way that technology's evolved, and you're getting cloud services pairing with hardware, and we're unable to depair unless there's an action from the previous owner, which we're not able to do directly. And actually the OEMs or the managers of that interface aren't allowing us as a third party to actually say, please deallocate these. I'm a bona fide operator rather than somebody who's stolen this device. And we're seeing this impasse from a lack of what should be a procedure, it not actually being carried out, and there's no ownership from the OEMs. And I think your cynical point that you say there, Ken, about just wanting to sell or sell new is potentially part of the truth. We've got that issue there with the way that we're involving technology. We're seeing, Ollie, back to your point, the channel, I used to run big trading programs for Sun and HP, and it was all about that. It was about displacing old, getting new, and a financial incentive to do that. What actually happened to the old technology largely didn't matter. Nobody seemed to care. Bear in mind, this was the mid-90s. It sounds like it hasn't improved, but we should be looking at end-of-life devices from a risk management perspective. And then the bit that you've brought up, Ken, about legislation. We've got the legislative framework, certainly in the UK, that we're operating to, contradicting sustainability, contradicting even the the waste framework hierarchy, which is about prevention. And we're looking at where this is going, and is the Regulatory Act going to curtail transparency from the industry? Let's talk about the sector itself, because we've looked at factors which are outside of our control. Ollie, let's talk about those who don't know a little bit about CoCycle. This is meant to be vendor agnostic, of course, but let's talk about CoCycle. What do you do to help your customers overcome some of these challenges, which are plain for everybody to see?
I think for us, it's understanding the outcome they want to achieve, right? When we look at redundant technology, there's been too much focus in the past on rebate value and commercializing that technology rather than mitigating risk and aligning that to other objectives in the business, right? At the end of the day, we're talking about a waste stream here, something that's redundant that we can be doing good from. So we're very passionate about doing good from redundant technology. So for our clients, and it's not a plug for CoCycle, but ultimately after every single engagement that we have, we're always advocating doing something good with that technology. It might be aligning to their own CSR goals internally, their own ESG goals. It could be their charity of the year. It could be doing something good with the return of funds. Likewise, with no obligation of the client, and I know it's not the be all and end all, we provide a sustainability summary that goes into, as best we can, the mineral consumption, the water consumption, the carbon utilized to essentially create that technology in the first instance. And then we will sit there and calculate and evidence what we can do through carbon offsetting through our reforestation partners around the world to offset the consumption related to that technology. So these are sometimes baby steps, but we always try and lead with that idea of sustainability at the forefront, because ultimately when budgets are spent and the client then 3 to 5 years later is looking for a return without considering the data side of things or the sustainability environmental side of things, they're doing the wrong job, right? They need to be moving the needle and pushing their strategy forward. Allow those that have businesses based upon this industry to sit there and be a life cycle solutions providers. We put ourselves out there. Let us be that partner to you, and let's think about this strategically, not just let the guys come in to take the e-waste bins. So I suppose that's what we're trying to do from a client-facing standpoint to change the agenda.
And I think, Ken, I'm going to get you involved in this. This is from Laurie. I'll paraphrase to save you reading it. I just realized that you could do this, by the way. I was mucking about earlier on while you were speaking. Sorry, Ken. They're talking about disposition being considered as a strategy before, in the design stage almost. And from user devices, Ken, which is primarily where you sit, not exclusively, but user devices, are you seeing improvements in the design process to enable repair, to enable reuse? Has it got better over the decade that I've known you?
Yes, in a short phrase, but the big players make it more difficult than the smaller players. So some of the sort of entry-level brands have made it a lot easier, and they've got design for disassembly. They've opened up their parts line so you can purchase the parts and repair. Some of your larger players, I know we've touched on Apple earlier on, they're making it somewhat more difficult and creating these third-party repair sections where you have to buy their machines and their parts, and it's much more difficult. We saw that with the unified charger cable as well. Everyone went to the unified USB option, whereas they brought out their own lightning cable to try and reduce the amount of charging cables that's out there. So yes, in short, in actual fact, some people have made it yes harder than others, and it tends to be the bigger players that make it done. And let's be honest, it's commercial decisions, and it's the same anyone around this table and who's listening would do to make their own business succeed. But it does present issues for us further down the channel that you have to overcome.
This is brilliant. Ollie, goes back to you on that, because that picks up your point about thinking of this as a strategic process as opposed to sort of a transaction. Because if you're just dealing with it in the transaction, you're not able to influence, how you can control that. Are you seeing, in your experience, channel operators and the original company releasing the equipment, not the original manufacturer, but those who hold it today, are you seeing them mature in their consideration about what to do with the disposition of their redundant equipment?
I'd love to say yes. I genuinely believe the channel has been more innovative in this area than the vendors themselves. I think the vendors, and again, saying their names, can create a badge and say, well, this hits some criteria. Here's your sustainability badge from said vendor. But do I think that they're doing anywhere near enough? Absolutely not. What someone says on face value and what someone puts on a website, and it's like, again, a lot of these publicly listed tech vendors, or they'll put in their sustainability summary at the end of the year, which they have to now put into their investor report, is one thing. What they're doing in reality tends to be a complete contrast to that. And it's not for me to sit there and call them all out, but at the same time, I'm seeing it time and time again. You think these are small changes you could make. Think about it this way. You mentioned around technology linked in with software subscriptions or support subscriptions. How great a marketing tool would it be for some of these massive vendors to have a secondary model where the subscription could be half the price because the technology is not as new, it's 3 years old, and then that could be reutilized and repurposed in the developing economy. It helps everyone level up. That model currently doesn't exist. And for me, there's a win-win there. The vendors win, there's a secondary use for the technology, and it's helping developing economies get to the next stage. So I think from my standpoint, I'd love to come on here and say the vendors are doing what they should be, but I genuinely believe, and to Ken's kind of cynicism earlier, I join in with that. I think there's just no will or want for change. I think they're quite happy to sit there and reduce the market with the view of they will always buy new at the end of it anyway.
We're going to run over a little bit, but on purpose, because we're getting to some interesting points here, and we're not going to do massive length of time over. But James, you actually, while you were speaking, Ollie, this came up in the text, so I've joined it, talking about ethical solutions being greenwashed. Is that part of the problem that we're seeing? Which actually, when we're talking about being green, whatever green may be, and we have to define that, of course. If we're looking at really affecting change which sticks, and I think we are in a movement of it being real this time. We've heard this before over many sort of iterations of green IT back in the sort of the 90s, etc. But this time it feels very different. Do we need to be truthful with ourselves? So it's not easy being green. You need to see the reward of trying. And those who aren't trying are talking, and therefore they're getting the benefit without doing. And is this part of the problem? To make change stick, we have to be truthful, and we have to actually make claims that are sustainable. And in your experience, Ken, are you seeing a lot of, and we're not just going to talk OEMs because they're easy to kick at times. We're seeing a lot of business talk the talk and get the benefit but without walking the walk. What's your experience?
I think at the moment, Steve, and I think that's part of what Ollie was touching on before in terms of engagement with clients, is that whereas you were dealing with information security managers or procurement or whoever the person may be who's taking our ITAD section, and it's never the same person, it's more and more increasingly being their sustainability manager who wants to know those things. They've probably got GHG scope reporting to do. They want to know what their carbon is, what their saving is. They want these good messages out of it. And it's something that we've probably already done for them for 3 or 4 years, but the message is now changing from not so much, it's always going to stay on the data security, but not so much can I get money back for my old equipment, can I put a good news message out for the service that you've already provided me. I see James put greenwashing in there, and I think there's a lot at the moment, people doing that, using the services and things they're already doing and trying to put the green message on there. And it's great they're already doing certain things, but whether they're doing new things is the question. And I think that's been good for us because people are more engaging with us, but I don't know whether certain people are just jumping in away from the vendors in terms of talking about clients things as well, whether they just want that for their reporting. And it's a good message at the moment because Greta Thunberg's out there and we've got to stop global warming and all that stuff that we should be doing. It's just whether they're actually trying to actively do something about it or are just trying to give the message that they are doing. And I think there's a disconnect between the two.
Ollie, give us your closing comment on the subject. It's not easy being green.
I think that, I've been, I suppose, overwhelmed with how the channel is starting to look. When I say the channel, I mean the partners in between. So this could be distributors, it could be VARs, it could be MSPs, how they're starting to put this at the forefront of their own strategy, how they're starting to look at sustainability statements and how they're trying to partner for the right thing. It might not always be the best commercial option, but it's the best option for their business because sustainability does need to be at the forefront. I think from a vendor landscape standpoint, there's so much more they could be doing. And if they were to reward their partners downstream for the work that they're doing, everyone would benefit here. And it doesn't have to cost them. There is business opportunity in sustainability and being green.
Awesome. Ken, I'm not going to come to you because we won't run over again, but I'm going to say
No problem.
thank you very much indeed. I apologize, it's a slightly different format, a little bit interviewy. So thank you very much, gentlemen. And for those listening, thank you for attending. We'll put the live transcript up on our YouTube platform. If you go on YouTube, it's ADISA Media Center, so you'll be able to see a replay of this. So thank you for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, everyone.